Let's call this meeting, Aiken City Planning Commission, Tuesday, January 15th at 6 o'clock. Call the meeting to order. First order of business, approval of the minutes from our December 11th, 2018 work session and regular meeting. Is there a motion? Second.
Second.
All in favor? Raise your right hand. Okay. Meetings, the minutes stand approved as read. Old business. No old business on the docket. New business. We've got to elect officers. The way we normally do this is we elect them. We elect them one at a time, and then we vote on each one, and then we continue with our business. So, President, is there a nomination for President?
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Jack Hunter to continue for Chairman of the Planning Commission for year 2019.
Second.
Okay. Do we have to do this by paper ballot?
No. So you ask for nominations, close nominations,
okay,
then vote on the nominations in order.
Okay, we don't have to do it by secret ballot or paper ballot.
That's correct.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any more nominations? Motion nominations be closed.
Second.
No, you make it.
Oh,
you make
I'll make a motion for the nomination to be closed.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of nominations being closed? Okay. All in favor of continuing me as president? Raise your hand. Opposed? Okay. Vice President.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to nominate Jason Raven to continue his vice chairmanship for year 2019.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Any further nominations? Let's do it this way.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to close nominations at this time.
Is there a second? Okay. All in favor of closing the nominations? Okay. All in favor of Mr. Raven as vice chairman, raise your hand. Opposed? Okay. Normally we have Ryan as our secretary. We go through the process. We don't have to go through the process with you.
As you do.
We do. All right. Do we have
bylaws say you do.
Do we have a nomination that Ryan be appointed as secretary treasurer?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to nominate Mr. Ryan Bland to continue secretary and treasurer for year 2019.
Second. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor of continuing Mr. Bland as secretary treasurer, raise your hand. Opposed? Okay. Good. Got that out of the way. Okay, first application is application number 19-60007, rezoning request on 901 Hayne Avenue by Mr. Harold B. Pridgeon. Anybody here to speak in favor of that rezoning request? Anybody here to speak in opposition to that rezoning request? Okay, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
In regards to application number 19-60007, current zoning, limit professional, proposed zoning, RS 15 single family, and according to the staff comments, it is consistent with the comprehensive plan, so therefore I recommend that we send this to council.
Okay, thank you. Second, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed? Okay, so we have passed that matter. We have rezoned the request by Mr. Pridgeon. Okay, continuing from our December 11th, 2018 meeting, we continued the two applications. Application number 19-60006, the rezoning request from office to planned residential at 828 Richland Avenue by the Marion Development Group. And we also continued the application number 19-22002, the concept plan approval request at 828 Richland Avenue by the Marion Development Group. So who do we have here to speak on behalf of Marion Development? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is James Duffy. I'm a developer with Marion Development Group. Ryan, do we have the site plan slide? This is the revised site plan that we submitted in preparation for this meeting. There are two changes that we did for this site plan. One being we reduced the density from 213 units to 160 units. And I know that there's been some concern about the density and that we're still over the limit for planned residential. However, much of the density is being created by the units in the hospital. We're proposing 66 units in the hospital. And if you were to carve out the hospital and say the nurses building, the land would include that parcel, the hospital would be over density. So a lot of the units are being built in that hospital. And that is a requirement for the sale of the property. When the county passed its ordinance, we were required to repurpose the hospital. Secondly, we're showing 4 new construction buildings. Each building would have 24 units. And then another revision we made is we added open space, and more specifically recreational open space. So we transformed the existing parking lot in front of the hospital into an active green space. It'll act as like a green plaza where residents can spend time and be outdoors. We also added a playground on the west side of the property that will service the family development. This pointer works. There's the playground there, and then this first phase here is a family development. We've also added we've shown the courtyard here for the hospital. That will be a patio and active green space for the residents of the hospital. And then we've also added this is the detention basin, and we'll landscape that to create a site amenity rather than just a big hole in the ground. Those are the significant changes that we made to the site plan.
Okay, you say you got 66 units in the hospital building.
Yes, sir.
And 24 in, is that, you might call it building A, I guess, and then 24 in another building, building B? All right, for 2 additional buildings with 24 each?
Yes, sir.
24 apartments each? And then, well, where's the rest? But you're asking for, where's the remaining 30 or so, or 40?
We've got 48 units here, 46 units here, and 66 in the hospital.
Okay. So a total of 160.
Yes, sir.
Which is still a little bit over the maximum allowable density under the PR district.
Yes, sir.
But you don't think that's a problem?
No, sir.
Okay, questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
the construction, assuming that you get to that point, how are you planning on phasing that construction?
So the hospital and this first phase new construction will be done roughly simultaneously. They'll each have their own financing, but the plan is to execute both those projects simultaneously.
So the hospital, then the first couple buildings there, and then when those are occupied, then you go to the backside to do the backside?
That's correct.
So it's 2 phases.
Yes, sir.
But the hospital, the redoing of the hospital would be in the first phase. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you can't do it all, you can't do all the new ones at the same time just because of space or?
Just risk and financing. We'd have to see, you know, if there is further need after that first phase.
So it could potentially just be the hospital repurposed and then the first couple buildings.
That's correct.
And do you have a plan for what you would do on the backside if there wasn't a need? I mean, what's the thought process there?
Well, we believe that there's a need. It's just we haven't ordered a market study or anything like that to confirm that. We're not that far along in the development process where we would do that.
I got you. Okay.
Mr. Duffy, could you explain more why you say if we allow you the waiver on the maximum allowed density that you don't foresee it as a problem? Could you give us a little more insight on that?
On why that's not a problem?
Yes.
If you look at the overall size of the site, that's 9.34 acres. That's a really large site. And being that this site is a part of downtown, we consider it to be in an urban area. Therefore, urban areas tend to be able to support more density than, say, rural areas, and that's why we feel it's appropriate for this density. And I believe the traffic count based on this density is significantly lower than the traffic count that's currently allowed.
Questions? How significant is the density issue to you?
Fairly significant.
Fairly significant. So if we were, and I don't know what we're going to do, and I don't know what the council's going to do, of course, but if we were to lower the density, that would be a significant issue to you.
The economic viability of the project would be in jeopardy. And we're talking, if we do all three phases, that's a roughly $25 million development.
3 phases or 2?
That would be the entire site. 2 phases, you're looking at about 17 million.
Did you not say 2 earlier?
I'm sorry, the hospital,
The first 2 buildings?
first 2 buildings is the second phase, third phase.
Okay. So the hospital's first phase, 2 exterior buildings is second phase, and the back portion is the third phase.
Yes.
All right, so we have 3 phases.
You would start construction on phase 1 and 2 simultaneously.
Yeah, phase 1 and 2 at the same time. They're different projects.
I understand.
Yeah.
I get that.
Thank you.
Did you try to figure out a way to keep the nurses' home intact?
We did. We looked at keeping that, how that would impact the economic viability of the site, and we would have to remove one of the 24-unit buildings to be able to accommodate that. So we're swapping 24 units for 8 units. That's a significant detriment to the overall project.
Thank you.
And at this point, you know, and I guess this would be obvious from reading your proposal, you don't really have any plans to do any kind of other use, mixed use, other than the residential, purely residential.
It's not in our plans right now, but if we had a local person who wanted to open a coffee shop or, you know, something like that, you know, we would entertain that. I think one of the biggest reasons why we chose planned residential and doing all residential is because, you know, we want to build housing that supports the downtown economy, not detracts from it.
Okay. Questions? Anybody else? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Duffy.
Thank you.
You're hang around here, I assume. Okay, anybody else in favor of, wants to speak on behalf of this, or anybody want to speak in opposition to this proposal? Yes, ma'am. Elaine, come on up. I know you well. I know you well.
Elaine Yaroche, 132 Trafalgar. I'm curious as to Marion Group's, my main concern is, as you know, I live at 132 Trafalgar, behind Shell House Funeral Home, so I'm a stone's throw away from this project. Been there 20 years, been in Aiken 40 years. How many of Marion Group's projects have Section 8 housing? Can you tell me that in your developments like this? Zero. Okay, so that's not possible in this location to go to that.
Section 8?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's my basic argument, is, and it's nothing against anybody, it's just, like I've said before, I'm opposed to any development right there downtown to the entry, one of our entryways to the city, to have Section 8 housing.
Well, this is not Section 8 housing.
But when you read any development that gets, and I might be crazy and somebody can tell me that, and probably am, but if you get tax credit incentives when you're building a development like this, when you read further down into it, it says that deeper, that the state or the, you know, if these apartments aren't rented or whatever as as they need to be, that the state and the city and whatever can go deeper into more assistance, which could become Section 8 housing. And I'm totally against, and everybody should be, of having more Section 8 housing in, our downtown area. We have a big county, and we have enough problems. I pulled all the police records for Han Village, for instance.
I think that's out of order for us to kind of
well, this is
compare one section of the neighborhood to another section. I just don't think we need to do that because that's not what we're here for. We're here to discuss the Marion project, and if we have that kind of insight on stuff, it probably gives people the wrong impression. So I appreciate what you're doing, but I just think when we compare neighborhoods, then we're just doing something that is out of order.
Well,
That's
my concern is, like I said, I'm 76 years old. If I need to do a reverse mortgage on my house in order to live the rest of my life, and I've worked until last week, I don't want anything going in there. And it's nothing against anybody. I just, when people don't have skin in the game and things, I don't want something to happen there that's going to take away the value of my house that I might need to take care of myself the rest of my life.
And I feel the same way you do, and I honor what you say. I just don't think we need to compare neighborhoods to what we're here for. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I feel the same way you feel.
We
That's
understand
fine,
it.
but
We don't want anything to go in either that's going to detract from anybody's value of their property. I mean, that's
These things, unlike like Kelmia Landing, where it's maintained, people can buy, they can rent, they can, and I'm not saying just elderly care. I'm saying, a development where there's more flexibility and it's not just all rental kind of thing. So, and I do think the density matters. So, I'm sorry if that offended somebody bringing it up, but it's one heck of a record if you read it. So we want to make sure. Also, if the prep school changes, and doesn't stay where it is, that's valuable property, that whole section for the whole downtown, So I think looking at the big picture is really important.
Yeah, I agree.
And a lot of times these developments, they buy them and then they sell them off after a few years, and things happen. So
Yeah, true.
anyway,
Okay,
thank you.
well, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Yes,
like
ma'am.
to,
Yes, sir.
I think it's a good timing to make sure that Ryan or someone else addresses the issue with Section 8 versus low-income housing credits.
Second that.
Because there are a lot of laws and regulations that come into play with this, and we need to be careful as a planning commission, first of all, but I think it's prudent to the people here in the public that they understand the difference between the two. So I would make that recommendation that Ryan kind of give us a quick synopsis of the whole issue that's at play.
So going into this, I would say that planning law generally sides on not evaluating a project or a development by who lives there, but by the merits of the project based on the criteria in your code. The difference between income housing tax credits and Section 8 housing vouchers. Section 8 housing vouchers, are also known as housing choice vouchers, travel with a party. They're distributed by a housing authority, fed down to them through the federal level. And those vouchers travel with a family unit or a household unit. And essentially that household unit, they do a calculation, 30% of their income goes toward rent. The housing voucher, if they find a landlord willing to take a housing voucher, makes up the difference between that and what average rent is in the area as published by HUD. What low-income housing tax credits are is a program by which housing can be financed. Typically, if you are building affordable housing to market to families at generally 60% area median income. So essentially, median income being if you lined up all families in the county, the person in the middle, that family in the middle of that line, if they line up in order of income, is median income. So half of your population is under median income. The 60% of median income is particularly what is targeted by low-income housing tax credits. When you build affordable housing targeted toward those, which are typically service working type family units, based on construction costs and a number of other factors, typically don't finance. There's a financing gap. What low-income housing tax credits allow is for a financial institution with a large tax liability to partner with the developer into a new partnership between the two that builds the project. For their stake in equity in the project, the bank or whoever the financial institution is that is buying into the project will receive the tax credits, which are a $1-for-$1 liability reduction on their taxes as a company. So it's a mechanism designed so there's a partnership for a period of at least 15 years between that tax credit investor and the developer to create and sustain housing with a certain number of units for people at 60% area median income or less.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference in affordable housing and Section 8 housing in this whole area. Many larger cities, Charlotte being one, I happen to be very familiar with that one, are trying to set up affordable housing. And the reason they're doing it is because the teachers in Charlotte, the cops in Charlotte, and middle income people cannot buy houses anymore in Charlotte. And Charlotte's not alone in that. And so they're trying to set up these affordable housing to give these people that are necessary to running the cities an ability, a way to buy a house or rent an apartment in the city close to where they work. So look, nobody wants to do, we don't want to do anything that's going to hurt anybody's property values, and we understand that. I think it's incumbent upon us to look at that, and we do look at that. And but we do have a piece of property here, and it's certainly not in a state now that anybody wants it to continue in. So at some point, somehow, some way, it's going to be developed. So we just hope it's the best way for all concerned. That's our goal. But we're an advisory body, so we'll make our recommendation, and the City Council will move forward. Okay. Anybody? Yeah, Gay.
Gay Smith, 1311 Hayne Avenue, Southwest. When we talk about these tax credits, which tax are we talking about, please?
When you talk, I'm not sure what your question is.
When you're saying that they will apply for tax credits, is this city, is it county, is
It's
it?
IRS.
No, it's income.
It's federal.
Yeah. Section 42.
Federal?
Correct.
Federal income tax
Who
rate.
will pay the city, will they pay the city and the county taxes as we are taxed
yeah,
on
yeah.
our property?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course they will.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next concern is this density. I think that you, as commission, need to address this density problem and bring it back into consideration of what we have set as density and keep it that way. Thank you.
Well, you know, frankly, my biggest issue or the problem is the density issue with the proposal. And I don't know the economic ramifications of that. Mr. Duffy tells us that if you don't allow the density waiver, then the project is not viable. I mean, and that's, if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. You know, we have to decide whether it's something that we're willing to waive or not, or whether the city council is willing to waive it. So that's my biggest problem with it, is the density issue as it's laid out at the current time. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Martin Buckley, live on Two Notch Road in Aiken. I've got a couple of concerns with this. This is a gateway to Aiken. It's a large site, a good site, a historic site, and a difficult site. It's difficult because of the terrain, and and high density will not help that. In fact, a lower density would make the whole project better if it can be done that way. There are, the considerations are the history. It would be nice to keep the nursing home if it can be kept. It's nice to do to keep the hospital historically correct and use it well. The density, 12 units an acre is 24, 36 people an acre, 18 cars an acre or more. The cars are going to take up more space than the building, and then the buildings. The high density is going to make it a whole lot more difficult on a difficult site, a sloping site. It would be, and having some land that's not used by parking or building is a good thing, some greenery, and where it already has leaned that way a bit. There's now green in front of the hospital, which is a good thing. But the density is going to be a problem. The waiver will increase the density, and not gonna help things at all. Now this, I think that we probably don't all agree about this, but I think this is not a bad project for Kentucky, but I'm not sure it's the project for Aiken the way it is now. I think it could be tweaked a little for us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's what you look at as you know, as a planning commission, and there's a rough analogy between density and cost. I mean, obviously, the more density you have, the more reasonable you're able to offer the cost of the either the unit to buy or the unit to rent. The less density you have, roughly your cost per unit goes up. And so it's a trade-off. There's a bit of a balancing act that you try to do to make it work.
Jack?
Yeah, yes.
Could I add something?
Comments? Yes, sir.
I'm not speaking for or against this, but what you have to remember is the hospital is going to have 66 units. I would say roughly, Mr. Duffy, on 2 acres maybe, 1 acre? So the high density is skewed because all those apartments are on a small amount of acreage. You've got 98 units on roughly 7 or 8 acres, which is very close to 12 an acre. I'm just pointing that out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Laura Bagwell. I live at 2111 Solstice Meadow Lane. I just had a procedural question. I've heard some comments that sound like they might be more concerned with the concept plan and not with whether or not you're considering the rezoning. So are we, this body at this point, only considering the rezoning request?
Oh, we're considering both.
I see. Well, in that case, I have some other questions then. I've heard some terms tonight that I hadn't heard in the previous discussions of this project. Mr. Duffy mentioned, I think, family housing. That's for the 2 apartment buildings along Vaucluse Road. Are those buildings, is family housing the 60% AMI target renter? Or is the 60% AMI going to be distributed also?
You can ask him. You can ask him.
I thought I had to address the board, and the board asked
You have to
him.
address the board, but
Yes.
I would ask you to ask him or Mr. Duffy to respond to that question.
Right, and is that target audience, or in earlier discussions, there had also been some mention of age-restricted tenants as well. So would those tenants be the ones on the Phase 3, which is going to be built along Barnwell Avenue? So that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Duffy, would you address that if you got it?
To clarify, the 2 buildings along Vaucluse would be built for families, working people is who that's geared for.
Okay. Okay. And what was her, and she had a second issue.
The age restricted.
The age restriction. Was one of them a senior? One of them was a senior.
There's a possibility
Okay.
of that.
Okay, that's all. Thanks. Okay, any other comments? Yes, ma'am. Come on up.
My name is Elizabeth Burgess. I live at 2802 South Carolina Avenue. I think my son probably has thrown stones from the hospital that have landed in my backyard. I really appreciate that the Planning Commission has been very thoughtful and very thorough. I hope you will continue to pursue a high standard of living for all residents in Aiken at all incomes. One of the concerns that I have with this project is that I was here at the last meeting, and the updates he's described tonight are those that it seemed he threw in, nothing against you personally, I know it's your job, were thrown in at the end of having been in Aiken and realizing that there was a lot of negative feeling toward the high density. So these updates don't seem any more specific or any more detailed than they had been at that time. I think that trading a 24-unit building for the 8-unit in the nurses' building would actually be very beneficial to the project. It might be an investment on one level, but if those apartments rent for more money than those other low-income apartments, that helps balance that, right? Trying to maintain a economically feasible project. I think better apartments, better feeling overall, will get more renters, and that'll give you mixed income renters, which I think is important. And I don't like the idea that they're going to start with the hospital and 2 buildings and then 2 more buildings if they're needed. If they're not sure that they need the whole property, if they're not sure that they need that density, why give it to them? I think that the city has invested a lot in that area. Eustis Park is a great example. I think the site is worth further investment, both by whomever is building there and by the recommendations coming from the commission. And I would also like to point out that that's a lot of parking lots for that density too, and maybe including something like bike paths or connectivity to downtown, pedestrian traffic and things like that over to Eustis Park might be worthy of consideration. So I'd like to see some more details fleshed out personally in this concept plan. And I don't think that the increased density is a necessity. Thank you.
Just for your information, there are a lot of options here with regard to this matter. There's all kind of conditions that could be placed upon it, and we'll talk about it briefly when we finish the comment period. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name's Susan French. I'm a retired historic preservation planner with the City of Aiken, and I live on the south side of town. I thought about this. My main issue, of course, is placement, siting, which are all things that have to do with design review. And I look at the pictures of the fronts of these buildings, and I think about the lay of the land and the gradient going down. And I remember that we, on more than one occasion, and we read about it all the time, we are starting to see people demand sort of a topographical map of the location. When I look at how long these buildings are with the apartments, and they're flat, and they're on grade, and then I think about how that land steps down, I don't see it fitting. I think it would be very important to see visually what those buildings would look like on that property. Do you see what I'm saying with that? We demanded it from a couple of developers who were doing condos because for many reasons, but these just look like they're built on a slab on a flat piece of land. This is not what we're dealing with. And I just think for looks, and I'm not talking anything else but looks, all those things, because that's what I care about. And what everybody should care about, to see what this is actually going to look like. It can be done. It's been done more and more and more, and it's just something to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Mandy Drumming. I live at 412 Northwest Pendleton Street. I'm thrilled the Marion Group intends to adaptively reuse the old Aiken Hospital building, giving it new life as apartments. But I'm concerned adaptively reusing the nurses building more so than tearing it down and replacing it with new construction would do more for Aiken. And here are 4 reasons why for it. Number 1, adaptive reuse housing attracts to downtown enthusiastic, young, educated professionals and those of the creative class who are often seen as the key to reviving the economies of cities. This attraction may be because these groups appreciate the aesthetic, cognitive, and moral value adaptive reuse projects present. Number 2, with the economic shift, people are investing and spending on experiences and not things. Small towns with historic character have been the places that have had the most momentum the soonest. Adaptive reuse of the nurses building strengthens the experience of downtown historic Aiken. Number 3, the adaptive reuse of the nurses building provides a clear view of and even accentuates the main Aiken Hospital building, as well as provides a beautiful gateway and authentic introduction into historic downtown Aiken. Demolition of the nurses building and in its place a new apartment building along Vaucluse and Richland Avenue would obstruct one's view of the hospital building and be the first thing one sees when traveling up Richland Avenue into downtown historic Aiken. And number 4, one of the most important reasons, the adaptive reuse of the nurses' building provides physical evidence, lending to a more encompassing, accurate story of the Aiken winter colony. As demonstrated by current historic downtown Aiken, Aiken winter colonists were less concerned with leisure and more concerned with cultivating a lifestyle based on the ideals of the American arts and craft movement. The movement was mainly supported by middle and upper class Americans, especially women, and synonymous with the progressive era, so between about 1880 and the 1930s. Both movements emphasized pre-industrialism sentiments and high thinking as an antidote to the ill effects and blighted urbanization being caused by the Industrial Revolution. What was esteemed was nature, health and exercise, especially that out of doors, pre-industrial revolution architectural styles, local materials, and superb craftsmanship, country day schools, and women as doers and reformers. The Nurses Building contributes to the telling of how the arts and craft movement shaped historic Aiken. The Nurses Building was built about 1940 and designed like the main hospital building in the arts and crafts style in the colonial revival tradition. That's a pre-industrial style, pre-industrial revolution style. This is evident in the Nurses Building's crafted doors, architectural details, and harmony with nature. And I gave some images of that to, and there's some on the chair over there if anyone wants to look at that. Both the Nurses and Old Aiken Hospital buildings, together with the organic, locally sourced sandstone wall, blend harmoniously with the surrounding natural landscape. The Nurses and main hospital buildings continue the story of the first Aiken Hospital building, it too being designed in a colonial revival version of the arts and crafts style. The first Aiken Hospital building was constructed about 1917 by the local renowned African-American construction firm McGee & McGee. They also built the Fermata Clubhouse, which is also designed in arts and crafts style, more of a bungalow style, and due to the charitable efforts of a group of Aiken winter colonists. So please, let's encourage the adaptive reuse of the Nurses Building for the betterment of Aiken. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I spent a lot of time in that Fermata Clubhouse when I was growing up. A lot of time. All right, anybody else? Yes, Mr. Tennyson.
I'm David Jameson. I'm president of the Aiken Chamber of Commerce. I live at 7 Woodwind Way. I want to speak to the density. I want to roll back to the density piece. And this pertains to any developer that comes to this site. There's a price of the land. The price of the land has a lot to do with what you can build on it. And so the county has established a price for this land. And then on top of that, they have confined any developer to save and reuse the hospital building. That's an expensive proposition too. And that's all I want to make sure everybody realizes is that the more restrictions you put on this property, the harder it's going to be to find any developer that can figure out how to use it effectively to the satisfaction of our community. So it's just an economics question. The cost of the land is very, very important and drives away a lot of potential developers. And then the requirement to use the hospital facility also will drive away some developers. Some can make it work, but that's a cost. That's a cost, and that's what leads to backing into the numbers to figure out what the density has to be on any project. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, your remarks are absolutely true. It's a balancing. You're balancing issues here. You're trying to preserve the hospital and reuse the hospital. That's almost a liability economically. From an economics, purely from an economics money viewpoint, preserving that hospital is almost a liability. Now, that may be something that the city wants to do, however, for historical reasons or whatever. That may be a building we want to preserve. So we just have to accept that you're going to make some trade-offs if you preserve that building. That's all part of it. It's not. This is not an easy, simple game or with easy, simple answers. unfortunately. It's really not. And, you know, I'd hate to be sitting here 10 or 15 years from now and we're still having this same discussion because the property is not developed. But on the other hand, you want to develop it as well as you can with keeping as much in mind of retaining the material and the buildings you want to retain, and having something that Aiken would be proud of and that people would be proud of to see it in 10 or 15 years. So it's not a simple equation. Okay, anybody else? Yes.
Good evening. I'm Tilden Hildebrand with Haston Hildebrand. I wanted to address just a few things that were mentioned tonight so far. The property has two potential rezonings. One is RMH. The developer has chosen planned residential. An RMH rezoning would allow 17.4 units per acre, 2,500 square feet per unit, which would allow 162 units on the property. However, the developer chose planned residential, and Paul, if you could flip back to the site plan. He chose planned residential so he could place these buildings in locations with more flexibility than you would see a standard just building parking lot in front. The planned residential allows more flexibility of setbacks and locations of buildings and parking lots on the property. Also, planned residential, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, also allows the city to further scrutinize a project related to the type of architecture. It allows the city to appoint or require more restrictions in the development. So he chose planned residential to allow him flexibility, but it also allows the city to further scrutinize the project. Point number two is on this site, as shown, there's 44% open space. You know, that I think that's saying a lot. The minimum requirement's 40. That's a lot of open space. That's a lot of land that could be utilized for development. And as was stated just a second ago, the project's got to be cost effective. Not trying to be funny, but these guys aren't doing this for fun. They're doing this to make money. And there's a certain minimum number of units so they have to have on this site to make it work financially. Susan French mentioned the topography. Yes, the topography is a challenge on this site. We haven't done the topo yet because that's a lot of money for this developer to spend before he gets to the point of knowing whether he can even do this or not. However, if you saw those buildings, there is some areas on the buildings where foundation walls could be installed. There are ways to accommodate the topography. Yes, I do think it is very important, and if he makes it over this hurdle, we'll get into the site design specifically that addresses topo and other issues on the site, traffic, etc. I think that covers the points that I wanted to mention, that I wanted to address, that have come up earlier. I certainly would answer any questions that you might have.
Anybody got any questions? Anybody? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. There was one other hand back there. Yeah. Who's he?
Good evening. Lucy Knowles, Two Notch Road in the city of Aiken. I just want to make a point about the first building nearest the hospital. This is the size it's going to be, and I'm concerned about the visual impact that it's going to have on Richland Avenue. And I'd just like to note that in the first concept plan that they showed a building down at what Mr. Duffy referred to as the left end of the project where the playground is now. And I'd like you to consider whether the visual impact of the project would be better if this building were moved down to where the playground is, and it would have the added benefit of perhaps preserving the nurses' home. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, we have to now have a discussion here among the commission members as to what we're going to do and how we're going to approach it. We got two issues out there. The request for the rezoning and the concept plan approval. The rezoning is, you know, we can yes or no, up or down on that one. The concept plan approval, if we approve it, we can make whatever, we can add conditions to it. And those conditions are that the planning department has possibly suggested are on page 9 of our handout. And we could add more to that, or we could subtract from that. We still have the issue, which we're probably going to consider our next meeting next month, regarding the historical overlay proposal on this property, whether we would extend the historical overlay to this property, which would have ramifications also. So, what do you think? Is that, have I stated it properly, Ryan? Is there, you want to add a little something? Or?
So I think the board had mentioned it may be helpful at this point to go over the options that the board could take.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So the board is making a recommendation to City Council. The code for planned residential and the concept plan, which are tied together, say that City Council may require any additional special conditions to ensure compatibility with surrounding development, preservation of natural or historic features, preservation of adequate infrastructure, and creativity of design. So essentially, again, within the residential, planned residential zone criteria, it allows for an exchange, essentially, of you can ask for waivers in return for something that would be of benefit to the site. The board essentially has a few options. You can recommend approval, granting the waiver. You can recommend approval with conditions. You can recommend denial. You could potentially continue it if there is, and there needs to be a specific reason why it would be of benefit to continue, as something like additional information that would be necessary in the board to be able to see the full picture and make their decision. There have been some discussion, again, of density and just running some, just make sure I have the calculations right, just so you kind of understand the various density on the site. So the hospital by itself, the rehab of the hospital by itself is roughly 7 units to the acre. The hospital plus the two that are being called phase 2, described collectively, I guess, as a first phase of development, that would be roughly 112, which is consistent with so if it were just those two things, it wouldn't require a waiver. So then therefore it's the full site that gets you to the 160, which again is comparable to our high density multifamily development. It would be consistent with that zoning district. However, again, that district would not be permitted to allow this general site design. And so I would, staff would be able to answer any questions that you would have, but essentially those are 4 options that the board has in front of them tonight.
And obviously they're all, you know, if we approve the rezoning, if you don't approve the rezoning, I mean, that kills it right there.
The rezoning and the concept plan go hand in hand in the zoning ordinance. Essentially, you can't rezone something in our ordinance to a planned district without having an approved concept plan with it. Essentially, what you see there becomes the zoning. And any change to that, any significant change to that, requires that to come back through the Planning Commission and City Council process.
Okay, what do y'all think? Comments? We need to I've made it clear, I think the density is the issue I have. And I don't know that there's a good answer to that, frankly. Because Mr. Duffy has made it pretty plain that that's a deal breaker with him if we change the density. So I think if we don't waive the density, I think in effect that ends the deal. Yeah, do y'all agree with that?
No.
Okay.
May I speak?
All right. Well, yes, sir.
I think, in my opinion, the old hospital is what dictates the high density. I think we can all agree on that. But a requirement of purchase of the property is to develop the hospital. And as, I'm sorry I don't know your name stated, they've asked for this particular zoning to give them more flexibility to make these buildings look more attractive, if you will. So they're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place. If they went with the high density zoning that would meet the zoning, then they lose their flexibility. So I personally don't have a problem with the high density in this particular zone.
But the city also, if they go with the RMH, then the city also loses the ability to control anything as is.
Right.
Then you're back pretty much with
right. You've got favorability of the two zones, and the question is which
way?
Is
That's
the
right.
best,
That's
which
right.
is the best avenue.
That's right.
Because I think their heart's in the right place. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, look. You know, that's what we got to do. We got to kick it around. We got to come up with a plan. We got to do something. So, anybody else? Comments? Charles?
I have a concern with the density, but I also listen to, as far as the hospital is taking up a lot of it. But the part that I really have a problem with, if we vote on this tonight, then we got to go back to the design review board to find out what their recommendation will be. Seem like we're putting the horse before the cart.
Well, we know that the design review board, as I understand it, passed. They voted to extend the historical district. It was not a unanimous vote, but they did vote to extend it, right?
Correct. Their recommendation is to extend the
it.
district to include this property.
To include this
the
property.
historic district.
So that would come. That now has got to come. They've already voted to extend it. So now we're going to have to consider that too.
And ultimately, city council makes that.
And then ultimately, it will go to city council. Well, somebody, we need to kick it around a little bit because somebody needs to make a motion on this thing so we can let them move forward. They're gonna, you know, as it's clear and everybody understands, we're an advisory board, so you know our motion is not binding. Our findings and motion and decision is not binding. It will go to city council either way, whether we deny it or approve it.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, so if we were to vote in favor of the concept plan with the waiver tonight, we still, for the next meeting, are going to have to entertain this historic overlay decision from the DRB.
That's right.
That's correct.
So no matter what we decide to do tonight, we're going to be right back here again discussing the ramifications of a decision from the DRB a month from now. Correct?
We could be, unless everybody just decided right now that they're not going to go along with the DRB.
And I would advise that would not be the case, as there is a full packet that you had not received regarding.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. So we. Well, you know, I guess you know we could continue it if it's the mood of the commission. We could continue it till next month until we've considered that issue, and then and I don't know what that would do to the developer. But I agree. I mean, there's a lot of issues out there.
To me, they go hand in hand. I mean, I don't like to kick the can down the road, but the decision the DRB made was vital to his development, as I understand it, as is this. But we're going to be having these same discussions in our next meeting with perhaps probably the same folks in the audience telling us again their opinion. And some of them I agree with. But I agree with David Jamison from an economical standpoint. We don't want to scare developers out of here. I mean, a lot of times we see these proposals for rezoning around Aiken of areas we want to kickstart from an economic vitality. And there's a lot of resistance for that because people don't like change. And I understand that. We got to do it smart, but if we make these decisions that are make it so hard for these folks to come develop these vacant areas, the lady alluded to crime earlier. Well, when they stay vacant, well, what do you think is going to happen? I mean, they're going. That's where crime is going to occur. So if you don't do anything, it's going to be just as bad as putting to what she refers to as Section 8 housing, in my opinion. So then whatever we decide to do tonight, we're going to be right back here again talking about the same thing. And they go hand in hand, I think. My struggle is the density. I do struggle with that. I struggle with that a lot. I like the good faith effort that Marion Group has done to ask for the zoning, like Bob alluded to give city more control. And he's got a lot more hoops to jump through after tonight, aside from us. But my feeling is I'd like to make a motion that we accept the request of the rezoning. However, at this time I can't grant a waiver for the density they're asking for.
Well, is your motion that you would approve the concept plan, except that you would change the condition that the density waiver be disapproved?
Correct.
And would you set a number on that you would approve it at?
I would approve it at the level that the
12 units to the acre.
12 units per acre.
That the zoning calls for.
That the zoning calls for. That the rules call for. The rules were put in there for a reason.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we keep that in mind when we look at some of these. And I understand the importance of granting waivers because they're forced with a hardship of developing what I think is going to be a monumental task in repurposing that hospital. But I struggle with the density, even though I'm aware that the hospital skews the number. I understand that. So that's my motion.
Would you consider adding to that motion that we add an additional condition? I'm assuming you're adding the conditions that are listed here from the planning department.
That's correct, as listed.
With regard to number one, you're saying that we allow the density we disapprove the density waiver and would require the density to be as is outlined in
the zoning,
and that you would add one more, that the question about the phasing issue, you know what I'm saying?
The hospital phase 1 would have to be concurrent with phase 2.
Okay, and you would add that as a condition?
I would add that as a condition. You cannot start phase 2 without starting phase 1.
Okay. Does everybody understand that?
Yes.
His motion? Is there a second?
I understand the motion.
Well, let's have a we got to have a second before we discuss it.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Now, it's on the floor.
We suspend it for discussion.
Yeah. Well, it's.
You can discuss now.
Now it's on. It's a motion and second. Now we're good.
May I speak?
Yes, sir.
I I understand the motion, but I think what you may force the developer to go to RMH zoning request. And that'll take care of the density problem, but then the city won't have as much control over the development. So that's my concern.
I mean, I think you know, that's a valid concern. But if he did that, if he does that, Ryan, he's still got to have a rezoning to do that. It's zoned office now.
That's correct.
You see, zoned office now.
Understand.
So he's got to have a rezoning to do that. And that's got to come right back through here in the city.
I understand.
Okay. Everybody got that? Now, any other comments? Y'all, speak now, forever hold your peace, man.
Hold my peace.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Motion's carried. 3-2. I don't think this thing is quite over yet. Any other comments? Any other? I think that that exhausts our business tonight. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.